Got it.
Okay. Tonight is Tuesday, May 12th, 2020. It is 7 p.m. In accordance with the Governor's Executive Order 20-09 and 20-18, the meeting is open to the public but will be held electronically. Public comment for the meeting hearings may be submitted via email to communitydevelopment@munster.org or by mail to attention Planning Director, 10,005 Ridge Road, Munster, Indiana, 46321. All correspondence related to received prior to the meeting will be read and entered into the public record. Since it's 7 o'clock, Tom, could you please call roll?
Yes. Aaron Mayer.
Here.
Stuart Friedman.
Here.
Daniel Buxbaum.
Here.
Jonathan Peterson.
Here.
And Roland Raffin.
Present. The next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll have everyone stand, and I actually have a full flag today. So we'll make it official. I'll start off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. The next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from April 14th, 2020. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes, and are there any additions, corrections, deletions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
is Buxa prepared to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I reviewed the minutes and I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Being none, Tom, would you please call roll?
Aaron Mayer.
Yes.
Stuart Friedman.
Yes.
Daniel Buxbaum.
Yes.
Jonathan Peterson.
Yes.
Roland Raffin.
Yes. We'll move on to item 5, preliminary hearings. The first one on the agenda is BZA docket number 20-006. I hope you get your last name right. Andrew and Carly, is it Olchek?
Yes.
Okay. Olchek requesting a variance from section 26-151A1 of the Munster Municipal Code to reduce the required side property line setback for a swimming pool to 3 feet to install a swimming pool in the rear yard at 8316 Castle Drive. Tom, I'll let you have the floor and discuss this item.
Sure, thank you. And Justin, can you scroll down?
Give me that card, would you please? I'm not gonna let him see my beard, don't worry.
There's a lag.
Okay. So you have in front of you here a plat survey with some sketches on it. Just refer to this as I kind of described the petition here. Property owners Andrew and Carly Olchek are seeking a variance from section 26-151A1 of our municipal code to reach the required side property line setback for a swimming pool. They installed their above ground swimming pool 3 feet from the side lot line. So you can see on this plat survey here, they have the location of their proposed pool kind of sketched in. You'll see that it is approximately, or it's shown to be 3 feet from that south property line. You'll see also there's a line kind of just north of the pool, gas and electric. They have a situation where their yard is bisected by this electric line, and the Indiana Residential Electrical Code prohibits any pool from being installed within 5 feet of an underground line. So they're seeking to essentially install their pool 5 feet away from that line. But in order to do that, they need to get a little bit closer to the side lot line that's permitted by our swimming pool ordinance. So which requires that you be 5 feet from that property line. So they can't get a variance from the Indiana Residential Electrical Code. However, there is a provision in our code for allowing a variance from our setback standards. So this is a situation where it is a variance, but it's a little bit different from a zoning variance in the sense that it's not part of our zoning code, but there are some standards, but there's a specific procedure that's permitted or that allows the Board of Zoning Appeals to vary our standards. So in the report that I provided to you, it outlines those standards. So you're used to typically requiring a petitioner to show a hardship or a practical difficulty. In this instance, the criteria is a little bit different. And I'll just read it for you since you don't have it up on the screen here. But it establishes a purpose for our standards, and it says it's to create a legal framework for a comprehensive town policy on construction, operation, and maintenance of swimming pools. And the intent is to preserve, protect, and promote the public health, safety, and welfare, protect the general public from damage and or injury, which may be caused by the faulty and uncontrolled construction or maintenance of swimming pools, and to preserve the value of adjoining private property. And then there's a clause that says the Board of Zoning Appeals may permit individual variances when the request for variance from this article is not in conflict with this statement of purpose. So those three kind of criteria are the basis for determining whether or not you want to grant a variance. I'll just note a couple things about swimming pools in general. Although the swimming pool ordinance requires that they be set back 5 feet from the property line, all other accessory structures are only required to be set back 3 feet from a property line. I'll also note that we do require a 36-inch, so a 3-foot impervious walkway to be installed around the pool. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. It's basically they're trying to install a pool between two setbacks, and they need relief from the side yard setback of 2 feet.
So Tom, just so I'm clear, if I was build a shed or a garage, I could be 3 foot off the property line, but a pool I have to be 5 feet?
That's correct.
What's the difference between a pool and a temporary structure like an above ground pool, or I would guess it'd be a little trickier to do a below ground pool 3 foot off the property line due to undermining the soil conditions, but an above ground pool compared to a garage?
I don't know the difference. I'm not sure why that, like I said, this is not part of our zoning ordinance. It's a separate article. And I'm not sure the rationale behind the 5-foot setback, to be honest with you. But it's in there. So,
It's in there. Okay.
So, may I, Tom?
Yeah.
Really quickly, 2 items, just anecdotally. I have an above ground pool that's 3 feet off the lot line. I think the 3 foot is just so you can get a mower deck back there and do a couple swipes, right? If we don't have an impervious surface. Mr. Buxa has his hand raised, so the next question should probably come from him.
Mr. Buxa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we get started, I would like to declare for the record a relationship with petitioners. I have served as Ani Olchak's track coach. Our daughters go to school together, and Mrs. Olchak is my wife's assistant volleyball coach. However, I do not believe there's a conflict of interest, and it will not render me from being impartial in my judgment.
Thank you, Mr. Buxa. Any other questions for Mr. Vanderwood? If not, I'll ask the petitioners to speak a little bit to explain their situation and what they're looking to do. Is anyone here to speak, Mr. or Mr. Olchak?
Me too. Yes, we are trying to maximize the privacy in the backyard as well as the safety for the kids and anyone else who's going to be using the pool, and also get the most out of the space in the backyard. The garage directly behind the property line offers full privacy back there. There will be that concrete patio that will be in front of the pool. Will also be home to a gazebo as the landscaping progresses. So we virtually have the pool blocked on all 4 sides, and then we still will be allowed to utilize the rest of the yard for the children. And we're also trying to direct traffic to that end of the house, has a bathroom right through that back door. So it offers a lot of convenience for the pool traffic. That's it in a nutshell in terms of the practical use of that area in the yard.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Olchek. Does any of the commission have any questions for Mrs. Olchek?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ms. Mayor.
So from the photographs, it looks like there was a pool there prior to this. And so that pool that was there was over the underground electric lines?
Yes, that was a
Intex.
that was an Intex pool that you could put up and take down every summer.
The inflatable ones, yes.
Oh, okay.
That was, that was sort of our test run to see if we were, I'm sorry. I didn't mention the dog in the plans, but it's actually this layout as a secondary benefit helps with the mangy mutt. But yeah, so we did this test run in placement with the Intex pool, which was really convenient, and our few summers that we tested the placement of the Intex pool, it really helps a lot to be as far back behind that garage. My neighbor in the Brown house had a massive oak tree that he cut down last summer or 2 summers ago? Two summers ago. But so yeah, that area of the yard is really,
It's wide open.
it's just perfect.
Right. Are there any other questions for Ms. Olchek? If not, I'll move it back to the board. Since this is a preliminary hearing, we're looking for a motion to set it to public hearing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Buxton.
I move that we set BZA docket number 20-006 for public hearing at our next meeting, and that petitioners be instructed to comply with all advertising and work with the town to prepare for that meeting.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. We have a motion and a second. Tom, would you please call roll?
Sharon Mayer,
Yes.
Stuart Friedman,
Yes.
Daniel Buxa,
Yes.
Jonathan Peterson,
Yes.
Roland Raffin.
Yes. Ms. Olchek, you have your request to go to a public hearing. Please work with Tom Vanderwood at our staff in town and make sure all the requirements are met for the next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
The next item we have on the agenda is BZA docket 20-005 Big Star Developments LLC requesting a variance to permit a single-family residence in the CD4A General Urban Area, a character district at 8319 Jackson Street. Tom, I'll let you take over on this.
Thank you. And Dustin, if you can go to page 2.
And remember, this is a preliminary hearing as well.
Right. So this property, subject property here is 8319 Jackson Avenue. You can see on this image where it's located. It's kind of on the corner of the alley south of Ridge Road and Jackson Avenue. There are 2 houses on the property. which we know anecdotally, but we don't have any formal records of it. They were owned by the Catholic Church and used as a kind of a rooming house for nuns, I believe, or priests, some members of the clergy. The petitioner purchased these houses and is seeking to kind of redevelop them as a single-family home. If you could go to the next slide. This is a sort of an excerpt of the zoning map with the location of the property outlined in red. As you can see, this is located in a CD4A district, which is a mixed-use district. Additionally, it has a couple overlays on it, one of which is no ground floor residential uses. So the permitted uses in this district are commercial properties, mixed-use properties, which would have commercial ground floor uses with residential on upper stories. And that's it. So a single family home or a multifamily dwelling unit would not be permitted. The petitioner here is now requesting a use variance in order to reuse this as a single family home. I provided some kind of brief analysis on the next page of the type of uses that are in this area. Maybe Justin, you can go to the next slide. The location of the building, the adjacent land uses are to the north, commercial, to the south, east, and west is all single family, some of which is owner occupied, but the majority is rental. Likewise, the primary building type in this area, even on Ridge Road, is a residential type of building. So you may recall that an application for a use variance has a bit of a higher bar to prove, a higher standard. We're used to talking about a practical difficulty for a developmental standards variance, but in the case of a use variance, the burden is on the applicant to actually prove in the use of the property as it's currently zoned. So that's a little bit of a background. I've included a recommendation in my report that is actually stating that I would recommend against granting a use variance in this instance. And the reason why that is as you can see on the picture in front of you, this property is unique within that area. And you saw on the zoning map that this is actually a residential, or it's a CD4 district, and this is the entire block from Ridge Road to South Street, going both east and west, is all zoned CD4. So it's all zoned this mixed use district. So my recommendation, as I said, is not to grant the use variance, but to think about whether or not it makes sense, given that this is all single family right now, to possibly rezone this area to something that would permit a single family use. I know that it's been a commercial district for decades. Prior to being zoned CD4 mixed use, it was zoned C1, which was an exclusively commercial district. So all the residential uses in this property or in this area have kind of been granted over the past decade. But the idea is that at some point they would cease to be residential and become commercial properties.
Tom, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at the zoning that you have commercial on there, and then you obviously have the property, it's just to the south of it. Is the commercial area, did you say that's also zone CD4A?
Yeah, in fact, if you can go up to the.
I just want to make sure I was looking at the right slide.
If you go to the previous page here. This is actually the zoning map.
Okay.
So the white line that goes through the middle of this drawing from east to west is Ridge Road.
Okay.
You see Jackson Avenue is there, and the CD4A district extends from Seaburger over Ridge Road down to South Street.
Okay.
And it actually extends from the almost to the Jewel property on the east to the state line on the west. So really South Street ends at the railroad track, so that's where the particular block ends. But that whole area from that alley south, South Street, is essentially single family housing.
So everything is legal, non-conforming in that area right now?
Right. There's I think offhand one house that's been converted to a commercial use. And you may recall that was where our Lee Blair State Farm Insurance office was.
Really
Now-
quickly, Mr. Buxa has his hand raised.
Mr. Buxa, you have the
Thank
floor.
you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to offer a clarification for Mr. Vanderwood's description of the property. The former owners were, the word is convent. It was a convent for the Benedictine sisters who served at St. Thomas More Church and School.
Then, is there
So,
any
and
other commissioner?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, because the houses have been empty for some time, they can't be used for residential, but they also can't be used for commercial the way that it is right now? Is that correct?
It is correct, because the property has been vacant for over a year. So the use as a residential property was discontinued for over a year. It's no longer considered legal non-conforming. So the property cannot be used for that residential use. The building itself could be used as a commercial building. There's nothing, it's a building type of, it's a single family residential building type, but it could be remodeled as a commercial building.
So, but are we encouraging businesses to be right in that same neighborhood with residences though?
Well, I think that if the zoning of the past 10 or 15, could be 30 years, is any indication, then the answer to that question would be yes. That the town made a decision to promote commercial use in that area by rezoning it to a C1 district. Now, when we did our zoning update, we changed that from an exclusively commercial zoning district to a mixed use district in order to allow some residential to be developed there, but only as a component of a mixed use building. And the idea is that over time, the residential uses would be phased out.
So, and if I'm read it correctly, though, it said that the first floor would be commercial and the upper floor would be residential, correct?
Right.
But
So
that you couldn't do that with the way these houses are configured now.
in this district, it could be either exclusively commercial or mixed use. So it could be a commercial, it could be an office, just an office with no residential component, or it could be a commercial use on the ground floor with residential above.
Correct. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Vanderwood? Tom, I have one question before I turn it over to whoever's making a presentation on this property. could you look at zoning this like as a multi-zoned area? Can you have residential and also have it zoned CD4A to give you the option if, you know, people might be coming in here developing this area, you know, that they see we have a plan that's going to be a commercial mixed use area. If the train ever comes, that you can have an overlying district with two zone with two different options.
Yeah, I mean, we could zone, it could be zoned however we wanted it to be zoned. And that's kind of why my recommendation is if the Board of Zoning Appeals is sympathetic to that use and thinks that's a good use in this area, rather than doing a one-off use variance for one property, we should take a look at referring this to the Plan Commission and actually having the Plan Commission look at that entire area and say, this is how we think single family would fit into this district. And whether it's, you know, Roland, it could be an overlay, you know, an additional overlay that says, you know, single family is permitted here. It could be a conditional use where we said, you know, if certain conditions are met, then in a CD4A district, then we would allow single family. Maybe it's being on a local street rather than an arterial or a collector or something like that.
Right.
All sorts of different ways to slice it. I just, like I said, my recommendation is not deal with this on a one-off basis, but actually look at the whole area, given that this use is pretty much throughout.
Because right now the whole area is residential. It's probably going to stay residential for a while, I'm guessing, until the train, if it ever comes, and that would bring hopefully development money and developers that might want to redo this area. You know, I don't want to see a petitioner get held back on a use of a single family home, two single family homes that probably should be used right now. But I also think the town has to have a plan that this is zoned, and maybe we could work with the petitioner if there's some kind of way we can make some agreements on, you know, having residential, and then with the master plan of obviously people come in later on developing, if they want to sell their property, you don't have to sell your property, but you know, you have to have an option out there that has the town's plans in effect. Are there any other questions on this? If not, I'm going to open it up to whoever's here to speak on behalf of the petitioner.
Mr. Buxa has his hand raised.
Who does?
Mr. Buxa.
Mr. Buxa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair to Mr. Vanderwood. Practically speaking, for this petition, would we start this petitioner down the road and have him advertise, incur those expenses? Or would we do as you suggest and you know, stop this at this point and move it to the Plan Commission?
It's not up to you.
That's a decision that I think you'll have, I mean, you'll have to discuss it amongst yourself. You can take my recommendation or you can reject my recommendation. So I think if you're leaning towards taking my recommendation, then it may be a situation where you advise them not to proceed with the public hearing, though they can if they want, right? Because that's where the official action takes place. But if you, after hearing their presentation, decide that, you know, you think they've met the criteria for a use variance, then you might want to, you know, advise them to continue on with the public hearing.
Okay. Any other questions? Is someone here to speak on behalf of the petitioner tonight?
Yes, this is John Reed, and I am here with the petitioner, Big Star Development. I don't know, I'm only seeing Mr. Rathmer. I don't know if you can see us on your
There's
screen.
only one person you should probably see. That's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Anyway, I'm here, and Harry, go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
I'm Harry Streeha with Big Star Developments.
Okay, and just to let everybody know, I don't disagree really with what Tom Vanderwood's position is on this. I think it might be something to look at as far as another overlay for people who want to maintain single family character of their homes. And what makes this one unusual, and while that's, I think, a capital idea, it does nothing at this point to help this petitioner with a current problem. Right now, the two homes, they used to be combined by a little walkway that went between them. The Big Star folks had that removed, and now it is two separate properties at that address. And in order to have any use for them that is even reasonably practicable in today's market, is just for single family use. If you look where it is off of Ridge Road and the uses in between and all the neighbors, this would be the only commercial property in what is basically an R1 single family neighborhood. And it has no market value at that use right now. Now, when the train comes, and I believe it will, they're buying up land and doing other things, and I certainly hope that it does, that may be the time for other developers and commercial developers to step in and, you know, do that, and the zoning is perfect for that. It's well thought out. I know that Tom and Dustin and the staff and all that town council that I was on and Plan Commission and BZA had a lot of input into that, and it is ultimately will be a terrific zoning category. And what's odd about this variance application is we're not asking to be different than everybody else. We're asking to be the same as everybody else. So we want to basically wind back the clock. And I know Tom had said that this is possibly, you know, we don't want to have a one-off zoning or anything like that. And I agree. I'm not a fan of spot zoning either. It creates automatic conflicts. However, in this instance, what we're asking for is a use variance to allow us to use the home as R1. And I'm not sure how clear it is in the petition. I hope that it is. What we would like, since you can condition use variances in any fashion you see fit, it would be to condition this use variance to R1 on it being and falling under all of the other elements of a legal non-conforming use, which is just exactly what all the neighbors are doing now. The only issue with this is it was considered abandoned, and I had this conversation with Mr. Vanderwood, and he was correct. He checked the water bills. No one was using it for over a year. And if you abandon a legal non-conforming use for a year, you revert to the zoning category it lays in. So we're not asking for this to be an outlier, to be R1 forever and ever and ever. What we're asking for is to provide a use variance to R1 conditioned upon it being classified as a legal non-conforming use. That puts us on the exact same footing as all of our neighbors, which is where we were. We just want to go back.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm going to put a few of my 2 cents in regarding these two houses as I look at them on the screen. Right now, with everything being a residential area, it was zoned R1 before. There was people living in it, you know, mostly a residential use. I'd have a hard time seeing the street right now being the first 2 houses and being rented out to commercial properties right now. Also, if they don't get fixed up, you're going to have 2 houses, in my opinion, that are going to be just getting more dilapidated or just not being used or have really no use in that area. So Mr. Reed brings up some good points, and I don't know if Mr. Wickland, you can chime in. Is there a way to keep this as legal non-conforming, but we have the intention of, you know, keeping this district as a C4A in the event that obviously someone sees this area and wants to try to put money into it and redevelop it in the future?
My answer is yes. I think you can place conditions on the property as Mr. Reed mentioned. I think that that's the way to do it. I think the rezoning is also a possibility. It seems to me, though, perhaps the variance route would be better. In either case, I think we have to go to town council to approve it in any event, but you certainly can put conditions upon the granting of the use variance.
Okay. And Mr. Reed, I would assume your client would be agreed to certain conditions like that on it.
Yes, I mean, that is our intention. We don't want to put ourselves in a position that's any different from our neighbors. If we, for example, went on our own and said, well, let's go to the Plan Commission instead. And for this parcel, asked to be taken out of the current classification, CD4A, and put in R1. You generally, a rezone is a rezone. And now all I'm subject to are the parts of the R1 zoning ordinance. That actually gives me something perhaps different, and for the time being, a higher and more practicable use than our neighbors. And that's not what we're asking for. And generally, zoning changes aren't conditioned on anything. So we wouldn't have that automatic reversion in an event that would destroy a legal non-conforming use, like the destruction of the property potentially. Destroy, I think, more than 50%. You lose that legal non-conforming use ability. You want to tear it down and rebuild it, you'll lose it. If you abandon it, you lose it. We wouldn't have any of those conditions if we didn't do the BZA route for a conditional use variant. So I think this, and this was so strange about this, and even when I was filling out the petition, it was odd. It's probably the first time I've done one where I don't want to be different. I want to be the same.
Okay. Now, Mr. Reed, I assume these would be either sold or rented out as single-family houses. They're not going to be a boarding house with 6 different people renting rooms out. This is going to be used as a family dwelling.
It will be single family with a substantial investment in them. Right now, even with the removal of the walkway in between to really make them 2 distinct residences, right now, because the uncertainty over what it can be, basically those holes are effectively boarded up and insulated, and it's waiting for a substantial rehabilitation.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes, Ms. Mayor.
So in that there are 2 property or 2 residences on one lot with one address, are they going to be subdivided into 2?
I'm sorry, Ms. Mayor, is that for me? Yes. We would eventually have to seek the subdivision approval for 2 distinct lots.
Because there'll be 2 separate single-family homes you look to split out.
Correct. And I think they originally were. And years ago, they were combined when the walkway was put in between them.
Okay.
And that was done, I think, for, not for any other practical reason than a camaraderie. And I think this is where the Gary Diocese owned it, and nuns lived primarily that were serving St. Thomas More.
Okay. Does anyone else has any questions for Mr. Reed?
Mr. Raffin, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Reed, I want to clarify. The member of the entity is Harry Stariha, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I want to disclose publicly, I represent Big Star Development in residential eviction matters. Nevertheless, I believe that representation is sufficiently remote and removed from this petition that it would otherwise permit me to render a decision objectively and fairly on this matter. So unless I hear objections from anyone in the audience or on the board, I feel that I can render a decision partially on this particular matter.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Reed? If not, this is a preliminary hearing. What is the motion? What is the position of the board?
Make a motion to set for public hearing BZA docket number 20-005.
We have a motion from Mr. Buxa. Do we have a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Freeman seconds. Any other discussion? Tom, would you please call roll?
Sharon Mayer,
Yes.
Stuart Friedman,
Yes.
Daniel Buxa,
Yes.
Jonathan Peterson,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes. Mr. Reed, it's been set for public hearing. Would you please work with Mr. Vanderwood at the staff to make sure all the meeting requirements and notification requirements are met?
Yes, sir, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing, and this is BZA 19-009, Guy Costanza, GM Contracting requesting developmental standards variances from section 26,931 to reduce the number of required parking spaces, and from section 26,602 to reduce the required setback in order to construct a 2,800 square foot building and parking lot for use as a cafe at 407-411 Ridge Road. Tom, I'll turn this over to you for a presentation to the board.
Thank you. Yeah, this project has been before the board a few times now. This is the plan to consolidate those two parcels at 407-411 Ridge Road into a single lot, construct a commercial building with parking lot. Because of the size of the property and the proposed development, petitioner is requesting the same, a few variances, developmental standards variances. The first is from the off-street parking standard. They've requested a variance that would allow them to have a restaurant with 31 parking spaces rather than the required 42 parking spaces. And then there are two setback requirements that they've asked for variances from. The first is a minimum planting strip of 20 feet at the front of the property. They have requested, or they're proposing, a 4.5 to about 13.5 foot planting strip. And then they're also requesting a variance from the building front setback, which is 35 feet in that zoning district. They're proposing somewhere between 11.5 and 20.5 feet. I'll note that, as I said, this project has been before us, before you, I should say, a few times. There's some requests that were made to the petitioner. Those are listed in your staff report. Specifically, they had asked for an identification of an end user, so that you could kind of weigh the pros and cons of granting a parking variance. For access easements between the property and the adjacent properties. There's a tree replacement plan that's kind of never been submitted. And there's also a request that this petition or this proposal conform to the standards of the current zoning ordinance. As we've said in previous meetings, this was submitted in 2019, so it was not subject to those standards of the new code, but it's also not compliant with the standards of the old code. So the thought from the board was, if we're going to, not adhere to the old code, excuse me, we should adhere to the standards of the new one. So I will note that some revisions were made to the plan since the last time you saw them. The building has been moved south, closer to Ridge Road, so it has a shallower front setback. And the stormwater plan was revised, eliminating a retention pond in the northwest corner of the property and putting in a rain garden and kind of adjusting the grade of the parking lot to hold some stormwater within the lot. So I've also included a table in the report that kind of talks about what the standards of the current zoning code are and whether or not they're met by this. I've kind of gone back and forth on how to approach this project since has gone to the board several times. And my recommendation at this point is to actually approve the application, but with a couple conditions. The first is one for parking, and I think in the absence of an end user, that kind of shows that the parking is not needed. And in the absence of any way for this property to have overflow parking, because there is no easement connecting this to any adjacent parking lot, there's no shared parking agreements or public parking within the proximity to
petition, or the subject property rather. I'm recommending that
Did we lose you, Tom?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think I lost. Okay, go ahead. You're recommending what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm recommending that as one condition, if you choose to approve it, you limit the number of seats within any restaurant. So they have 34 spaces, which corresponds in our code to 77 seats in a restaurant. So I would suggest that if it be approved for a restaurant use, it would have to limit the number of seats within the building to 77. The second condition that I would recommend is that the development plan, which needs to be approved by the Plan Commission, ultimately conform in all respects with the new the standards of our current code. So you would grant that parking variance, the setback variances and those types of things would not be necessary anymore, because the project would actually comply with those new code standards. So those are that's my recommendation as far as whether or not to approve it. That's a decision that you can make, but I think, common sense conditions would allow it to move forward, and it would essentially hand the project over to the Plan Commission and let them address some of the, the overall development plan and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Tom.
One other thing, I did get an email today from somebody with respect to this project. So if I can just read it into the record.
Yes, please do that.
Okay, let me pull it up here. I can have it right in, but you know what, bear with me for a second because I gotta find it on my email. I didn't save it, unfortunately. Okay, yeah, so this is from Michael Gepford. He is saying, regarding the recommendation to limit the capacity of this development to 77 patrons based on the 2.5 persons per car space, as a community that continues to talk about bicycle and walking access, this recommendation does not consider those that may choose to bike or walk to this establishment. With the potential of a future train, many may walk to this establishment after commuting by train, more than likely leaving their car parked in the train lot and walking. The connection of the bicycle and walking trails, as well as those who may park in the train parking lot, seem to make this an establishment that may benefit from foot traffic that does not utilize automobile transportation and therefore not need as many parking spaces. A drive-through for those on their way to the train may be a better use of even the spaces currently proposed. That's Michael Gepford, 10380 Oxford Place.
Thank you, Tom. Does the BZA have any questions for Tom? That being said, I'll turn it over. Is there someone here to speak on behalf of the petitioner?
I believe John Reed is going to speak on Mr. Costanza's behalf.
Thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Reed. The floor is yours.
I have a revolving door in my office tonight, and I have Mr. Costanza next to me now. I don't know if you can see us. But yes, I am appearing with Guy on this project, and we have discussed at some length the parking space issue, where I think it's every parking space for 2.5 patrons, that would be the 77 number. Guy has taken another look at the layout. And actually it's important to note here, I know it says in the agenda that it's a 2,800 square foot building. It was at one time, it's been reduced to 2,500 square feet. Just to be clear, we would not be able to, under any circumstance, if it ends up being a cafe or something of that nature, even be able to get 77 seated positions there. It would be between probably 10 and 12 four tops is about all that would fit in that particular space. So we have no issue with the restriction. And staff recommendation, Tom's recommendation number one, we agree wholeheartedly, because doing more than that, frankly, would be a practical impossibility. As to the second, where we're talking about going under the new plan, even though this was the new zoning ordinance, even though this was filed under the old zoning ordinance, we do take issue with that. One of the things that's required under the new ordinance is that you have to have, I think, a minimum 2-story building. That creates an entire another set of headaches with the parking spaces, because now you've got 2 stories instead of 1 on the same footprint. So maybe this is something that's more appropriate for the Plan Commission when it comes to site plan review, when an end user will be known by that time. Certainly you're not going to go pull a building permit when we don't right now know who in the marketplace is going to come along and make a legitimate offer, to have us build and ground lease this property and lease the building. So that would create, I think, some other challenges that we don't think will fit the site, but that may more appropriately be a Plan Commission site plan review issue than a BZA issue. I know that Tom's recommendation, other than that, is positive, and we have no issue with staff recommendation 1 on the maximum 77 seated positions, because we wouldn't be able to meet or exceed that.
Mr. Reed, one question. Some of the other things was, and I would assume your client wouldn't have any problem with providing access easements in the future if it becomes deemed necessary for cross access easements, or providing a tree replacement plan either.
No, absolutely not. And I know when the old house that was there was, I think it was approaching 100 years old, was taken down. Obviously some of the old trees and things were taken out too, because we know that we're going to conform to the new landscape plan. Everything needs to be refreshed and redone, and will obviously meet or exceed the current landscaping requirements. And yes, cross access, I think, benefits all the properties. The more access between them, the less having to dart out to actually go out on Ridge Road to move from one property to another is preferable for everybody.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Reed and Mr. Costanza from the BZA? If there are no questions, Tom, this is a public hearing. How do we, is there anyone here that raised their hand from the public to speak?
No, there's not.
Okay. Going once, going twice. The public hearing is concluded, and we'll take it back to the board. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Raffin,
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
could Mr. Wickland confirm whether the public notices conform with statutory requirements?
My understanding is that they do, and they have.
Very good. Thank you.
This is one that's been continued, correct, Mr. Wickland?
Yes, continued several times.
Any other questions for the petitioner or Mr. Vanderwood? I'll give you my personal opinion just so it's on record for the board. I don't have any problems with limiting the number of seats to 77 as recommended by the town and agreed upon by Mr. Costanza. I think we should make sure, obviously, that the access easements are in place for connection, as we talked about, as well as a tree replacement plan. Mr. Costanza, one thing I'm gonna know, because I'm gonna see you at the Plan Commission, and this will be another conversation, is I think we're gonna have to work on a design concept of the building, and I wanna steer you along on that way regarding building materials and stuff. We might wanna make sure this building, although it doesn't have a second story, that it has an appearance that it's gonna look like the other buildings that are gonna be on that road, whether you have a fake second story or not, just so we come up with the plan and what we want this corridor to look like in regards to our transportation district.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'm with Guy. Guy says absolutely no problem. He plans on doing that. And as far as materials go, we can certainly get into all that at the Plan Commission level. But I think the plan is, if all or almost all masonry, no split face block, no sheets, no, man-made stones, things like that. So the plan is to have it as classed up as possible. It's not a big building. Those changes don't add an enormous amount of cost.
Well, we might just want to look at maybe the height just to make sure it blends in with some of the stuff that's going to be coming in that area.
Could even be windows and things. Yeah, understood.
Right.
So it'll
Right.
appear consistent across the district.
We did that with Centennial Village a little bit by raising up those buildings, making them a little bit taller to have a different appearance.
It's much more of a village, kind of Venetian village type of appearance. And that's, I think, ultimately, as Ridge Road progresses along, and I think a lot of the facades will be redone, and that'll be the consistent pattern throughout to have more of a real downtown sort of feel.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Mayor.
So I'm trying to understand why Tom wanted this to go with the new code. Tom, can you explain that again? Because I'm not clear.
I think there's a couple of reasons. One, that's something that I've heard from the Board of Zoning Appeals, members of the group. The second reason is that you kind of have one design philosophy, one design standard represented in the old code, and that was kind of a more suburban style development. Now, in our new code, our current code, you have a different kind of cohesive set of standards. So my recommendation would be, if we're going to deviate from
Tom, we lost you. We lost you after, if we're going to deviate.
do so in a way that implements an alternative set of standards. But right now, if you just approve the setback, all those other kind of design standards attached to them, I don't think you're going to get the type of project that you really want to see in that area. And I think what I've heard from the board in past is that they want to see something that kind of exemplifies current standards if they're going to grant a and when you have a variance,
I can't hear Tom.
Tom, you there?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, bad connection, Tom.
Volume's going down.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now better.
Okay, I'm leaning as far into the microphone as I can see me. But what I'm suggesting is that, I don't know how much you heard. If we're going to start changing certain standards, I think we've got a great set of standards in place with the new zoning code, and we should have a project adhere to that in total, rather than have a sort of hodgepodge design where you have certain elements of the old code trying to fit in with certain elements of the new code.
And I'll say this, and I don't mean to interrupt, but from the petitioner standpoint, as long as that does not require an actual occupiable second story, which is required under the new code, that's fine. But the way the building is essentially laid out now, other than perhaps its ultimate look and materials, that's not a problem as long as it's limited to that, and there's not a something hiding in the mist that's going to jump up and bite us later. And I think probably, and I may or may not be right on this, I don't know what Tom's or Dustin's opinion is on this, seems like more of a plan commission issue when it comes down to site plan approval. to whatever elements of the old code or the new code, whatever makes the most attractive building that the plan commissioners would approve, that would be the goal. And if something, you know, say there's something better that may be part of the old code, or you want to attach the limit of uses, so you don't have, you know, tattoo parlors, smoke shops, those kinds of things. Guys not in that, doing things in that business anyway, but that's fine to place those restrictions on it. I just don't want a major impediment to come up like, okay, now you have to go from 1 story to 2 full stories, and now I have a much bigger parking problem, theoretically.
And I would have to agree with a little bit of Mr. Reed on this part, being that this is such a small building, and I can understand if the developer bought where Marco's is and the whole thing and looking at tearing the whole place down. But here's the problem: you have one little lot, and you're not going to stick one little apartment on top of that 1-story shop. And that's why I said you might have to look at making this building look like what the other buildings are going to look like, with a false taller building, but you're not going to have an occupied space up there.
I agree.
Does anyone else have any opinions? Ms. Mayor, you have a construction background. You're kind of visualizing what I'm saying.
I am visualizing what you're saying, and I guess I didn't realize that that district was meant to be 2 stories. So, I mean, that would require an elevator and, you know, a whole slew of things that would come into play with having to have a 2nd story.
For one unit.
What's that?
Only for one unit above.
Yeah, for only 1 unit above. I mean, you know, you look at that, you know, the Boyer development on Calumet Avenue, you know, that mixed use kind of a look, even though there's no apartments above those commercial spaces, but it looks like there could be.
Right.
Is that what we're going for? Is that the look that we're trying to achieve?
If we're trying to make it look like a CD4 mixed use development, yes, that would be the look the plan commission should be looking at, to make sure that building looks like a mixed use CD4 building.
So in regards to this petition, then the motion would be something to the effect of, you know, that this petitioner or this petition would be subject to the requirements of the new code, except for the requirement for it to be a 2-story building, correct?
2-story residential above there, right?
Right.
Mr. Reed, does that sound agreeable?
Yes, it's, and the developer, that's exactly what, I'm sitting right next to the guy, and that's exactly what he wants to do. He's nodding his head in agreement that it should look and feel exactly like that whole area is going to develop.
Okay, so we have a concept of what the building is going to look like. We have an agreement on the parking down to 77 spots. We have agreement on the easement and the tree replacement plan. And most importantly, Tom, I think we're looking to meet the new code standards by making that building look like a CD4 building, although we're not going to have residential on the 2nd floor of such a small little space.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Buxa.
if Ms. Mayer's was an official motion, I would like to second it.
Well, it was partially because it did not indicate the parking. I guess I would need to amend it to add that the 77 parking space. Was there anything else, Roland?
Ms. Mayor, did you have the easements as well as the tree replacement plan and the conditional of the building looking like the CD4 building to meet the new zoning ordinance?
So amended.
So we have a motion and a second. Tom, did you get all that? Tom, you there? He's having microphone problems. Tom, are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tom. Did you get all that?
To buy Tom a new iMac Pro 18-inch.
All right. Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Did you get that motion in a second?
I did. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. One, the number of seats in the restaurant is limited to 77, so not the parking spaces.
Yes, yes. that's
Correct, correct.
That's correct, the number of seats.
And then I wanted to ask for a clarification when you say the standards, all the standards of the code will be adhered to with the exception of the height requirement. Are you referring to standards for the site?
Well, I think we're looking at the proposed layout as it is regarding the setbacks and stuff, Tom. That's proposed tonight, correct, Mr. Reed?
Correct.
Yes.
And it's not really the height, it's the matter of requiring a second floor, correct?
Yeah, so, making the appearance like Mr. Boyer's building is like we talked about. The height is basically of making it look like a taller building. The facade, although it's fake, it has the appearance of that.
Okay, so I just want to clarify because there's a list of standards in the report that talk about, for example, frontage build out, location of the building at the frontage, facade position, off-street parking location. So those standards are not, you're not seeking to have those standards implemented, just the architecture of the building?
Yes, my personal opinion, I thought the site layout was fine. I thought the building up towards the street with the sidewalks, it was walkable. It was close to the street, which if you're gonna have a train there, I'm gonna wanna walk as close as I can to the street. Sidewalk right down to get to that building if we're having a cafe or restaurant. So I didn't have a problem with the setting of the proposed building, the 2,500 square foot, or the right in, right out, or anything like that. It was mostly some of the architectural, the parking, and the height of the building, as well as, like you said, the easements and stuff. Am I thinking the same as the commission?
Yes.
Does
Okay,
anyone else have any comments?
I just want to clarify, so if we can go, actually, Dustin, can we just go to that page on the, I just want to make sure that
And I believe even the email from Michael Geffert, I think he brought up some good points about the biking and riding with this lot. I think you're going to get people walking here and biking here if it's a good cafe or coffee shop.
So again, just to clarify, I just want to make sure I've got here on the screen, the standard, the code, and the actual. And can you just tell me which of those standards you want in place and which you want to waive?
Well, here's my opinion. The maximum lot width, 129 feet compared to 100 feet, it's going to be 129 feet. That's the site on this one. The building height, you have 2 to 6 stories. Right now, they're proposing 1 story. I believe Mr. Reed and Mr. Costanza have agreed upon making this building taller so it has the appearance of a taller, bigger, denser looking building. The frontage build out, 80% minimum, approximately 39%. I think the frontage build out is fine. Right now you got it parallel or frontage or oblique. I think where the building is set back is fine as it is. Same thing with the facade position. And I think the off-street parking location, I think you're by limiting the parking on this with the amount of people coming in there, I don't think you're going to have a parking problem per se with having a single use limited tables. So according to Mr. Reed, said between 10 and 12, 4 toppers is 48.
Okay, so you're saying that all those standards, you're only asking to adhere to the standards for the architecture of the building.
The building height. Am I on the same page with the BZA?
Yeah, here.
Yes.
Mr. Reed, any comments?
I think that's an exact recitation. Basically, the footprint stays where it is. The angle of the building stays where it is. It just has a more complete appearance of a functional second floor without actually having a functional second floor. But all the building, the standards, the materials, all the things in the new zoning code would apply.
So basically, we pulled building up to the street, and we're not running parallel with it.
Right, I think it was talking about, I mean, when they talk about like the frontage build out, for example, you're basically talking about turning the building around, and that severely limits the parking, creates a larger problem, where it almost becomes unbuildable at that point. So
It's a tough lot being 129 by 169 for a commercial property.
it is. I mean, the building actually would be, it takes, I think, less lot area than if it were in R1 with lot coverage. So it is, a 2,500 square foot footprint on a lot that size is actually quite small.
Quite honestly, you're right. I could probably build a bigger single family home on that lot if it's an R1.
Yeah, you get about 3,600, 3,700 feet.
So Tom, are we clear with the motion in a second regarding the standard compared to the code of what was set in the motion tonight?
Mr. Raffin,
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
I have a question for the petitioner.
Yes.
It's my recollection that there was no end user in mind for this building. It was being built on spec. Is that still the case?
That is still the case. There is not an end user yet. This is, when we talk about cafe, that is the most active or populated use that there would be. The only other uses you could look at would be a professional office or a small retail. But given the area that it's in, cafe or professional office, we have actually had approaches by, we won't say who's, protect those tenants. They may be tenants of other properties for professional office so far. I think, and I have a feeling, and the developer and I have talked about this, as the train prospect gets closer and closer, I think you're liable to see more of the cafe type user as opposed to the professional office, somebody where foot traffic would be a plus.
I want you to turn on the
Okay, Mr. Raffin, I've got a follow-up question for that.
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Reed, then could you explain, I think the board has asked this in the past, why doesn't the builder identify the end user and then come to us with a variance that we know is going to result in a building that's being built and used? I think the concern that has been stated either explicitly or implicitly in the past is that we grant this variance and either the construction never occurs and then it's been a big waste of time, or alternatively, the building is put up and then it sits vacant, unused, and now we've got a worse situation than what we have presently, which is a space that potentially could be developed for these variety of uses. What's your thoughts on that, please?
Well, I would say it's really a question of timing. Sometimes you know who the end user is, and sometimes the end user comes in with permission of the property owner and makes the petition to get this done under perhaps an option agreement or something like that. Mr. Costanza is the developer, but not an end user. And to be able to successfully market it to an end user, you have to be able to show them that you have the approval to be able to build and do what they might want to do. So when we talk about the variances required for particularly parking, I think was originally the biggest issue here. The most dense parking that could possibly be required would be for the cafe. So we're sort of painting you I don't want to call it a worst case scenario, I want to call it a highest use scenario. That's what it would be. It would be under the parking requirements if it ended up being professional office. At 31 spaces, it would be more than adequate, even under the code. So I guess, sometimes you put the chicken before the egg and sometimes the egg before the chicken, which is sort of where we find ourselves now. In order to market the property, we have to be able to show people a footprint that can be used, that has been approved for use. And it's right now sort of the only way to do it. And another example would be, in Centennial Village, the developer is building buildings and not all of them have tenants. Everybody wants to know. I'm dying to know too, but sometimes it's a build it and he will come, and sometimes it's pre-approval for a particular tenant. We're just not there yet in the marketing phase of this. And it's hard to tell people when somebody comes along and says, okay, I want to do a cafe there like Cafe Elise, if you remember, that was in Harrison Ridge Square or something like that, and say, well, let me take half a year or so and see if I can get those approvals. They're just going to move on down the road, and we're not going to have the opportunity to get that tenant.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Tom or the petitioner? We have a motion and a second on the floor. So Tom, are we clear regarding the variances of what is being granted tonight?
I believe I am. You get that? I believe I'm clear. Yes.
Okay. Then if so, I'll have you call a roll.
Well, this Rafferty guy, he's really,
Okay, Sharon Mayer,
Yes.
he's really,
George Friedman,
Yes.
Daniel Buxa,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
and Jonathan Peterson.
Yes.
Okay, motion
Motion carries. Mr. Reed, Mr. Costanzo, we'll see you at the Plan Commission meeting, and we'll move forward on design concepts and the design standards of your project.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Much appreciated. I thank the staff. I know they spent a tremendous amount of time working on this, as small a lot as it may be. It was a lot of effort, and we appreciate all of it.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next item on a public hearing is BZA docket 20-004, Libro Inc., Tony Hannes, requesting conditional use permit for a restaurant with an outdoor dining in CD4A district in order to operate an outdoor dining area at 313 Ridge Road. Tom, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, we heard that you heard that at a preliminary hearing last month. The petitioner is Tony Hannes, the operator of 313 Tap Room, which is a self-serve bar at 313 Ridge Road. They have remodeled this building and constructed an outdoor dining area. They are now seeking a conditional use permit to use that dining area. They have provided the plans and photos of the patio. As I noted at the last meeting, the staff has no concerns about safety. The outdoor area is located about 70 feet from Ridge Road. In terms of access, it is gated off. The only access is through the building itself. But there is an emergency access gate at the rear, which can be used to exit the patio in the event of an emergency. And in terms of effects of noise on adjacent properties, the nearest residential property is about 150 feet away from the patio, so we don't have any concerns that noise will be an issue. After the preliminary hearing, two kind of concerns came to our attention as staff, and so we're recommending kind of two conditions to the board here. The first is that at the time that this project went through its administrative approvals, there was a landscaping plan that was submitted in keeping with the redevelopment. That plan was not completed. And so consequently, staff is recommending that it actually be completed as a condition of the special use permit, or conditional use permit rather. And then the other kind of concern that we have is if you take a look at the next page in the report, they have a shared parking agreement with the property to the west and to the north to use their parking lot. And there's kind of a dilapidated screening fence located at the edge of that parking lot between the parking area and the and a residential property. And we're recommending that as a condition of the permit, the petitioners actually replace that fence with a 6-foot solid fence and kind of eliminate that eyesore in the property.
All right. Thank you, Tom. I'm going to move this right to the petitioner and let them have a chance to speak regarding this and what they're trying to do. Is there anyone here to speak on behalf of the petitioner?
Yeah, Tony Hannes and Mark Foray.
Hi, Mr. Hannes, Mr. Foray. You want to give us just a brief synopsis of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, so as far as the landscaping goes, we had the plans and we submitted them in. They were approved by the town, and that's what we're working on right now. So we have all the pavers here for our sidewalk. Everything's going to get planted here. It's been cold. We've had a frost. Our landscaper is just waiting to make sure we don't have any more frost and then get everything else planted in there. So that is not an issue at all. We'll have all that done. Hopefully, he's starting on it this week. So we should have all that completed and taken care of on that end. Regarding to the fence on there, it's not our property. It's not, when Mark owns the building, it's not on his property. So one would be putting a fence up on somebody else's property, which I don't know how there's a lot involved with that. One, we'd have to get a survey. We'd have to get their permission to do it. We'd have to work with them to put up a fence, for starters. Two, we were open 3 months before everything hit here. And we were shut down for 2 months. We're a little strapped, to be honest. So we're trying to get a business up and going right now. So to be putting up a fence is just, it's not something we have at this point in time, to be going and doing something like that.
Okay, gentlemen. Thank you. BZA, is there any questions that you have for the petitioner? Going once, twice. This is a public hearing, so I'm going to open up to a public hearing right now. Is there anyone here to speak in regards to this public hearing?
April, I got one piece of correspondence.
Okay, Tom, would you read that, please, for public record?
Yeah, this is from Guy Costanza. He says, I received notice in the mail of the 313 Tap Room's request for a patio. I'm a neighboring property owner, and I think the tap room having an outdoor patio will be a nice addition to the town. I have no objection to the outdoor patio. Guy Costanza.
Tom, I have a question for you. Who owns that ratty fence?
Guy Costanza.
Oh, he does? Okay. Is there, with you guys sharing parking, is there some kind of maybe agreement you guys can come up with trying to make it look nicer in that area? If we gave you guys like a length of time, like within a year, I know everything's shut down, that maybe we can get, it'd be better for your business and the whole neighborhood to try to get, a nicer fence in that area. Is that something you guys would be willing to look at down the road?
That's, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Ratty fence. If no one had a fence, I think they would think that was a wonderful fence. You should see the fence that the city has on our east border.
On your property?
Yeah, sure. Does not look much better than that ratty fence.
I gotcha.
Maybe we could all get together and the town could put a nice fence on our east side and we could work with Mr. Costanza on upgrading that ratty fence. And we would all benefit in the process.
Tom, can you blow that up a little bit more? I got on my screen too.
I'll just note that there is a requirement in our code that when you have a commercial property adjacent to a residential property, that there be a screening fence installed. The reason why this wasn't included as a condition originally with their certificate of occupancy is because they don't actually own the property. So we talked with Guy Costanza about the issue, and I think he would be open to allowing them to replace that fence.
Right now, half the slots are missing in it.
Yeah, that's a chain link fence with plastic woven into the links.
All right, I'll bring it back to the commission. What's the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Mayor.
So I understand Tom, would want them to put up a new fence, but in the immediate, maybe just replacing those vinyl slats would at least improve the look of it. What kind of shape is it in? Is it like falling over or anything? Is it stand straight up?
It's, if I might respond to that, it's not. The fence is sturdy. It is missing slats. A good coat of paint would probably go a long way with the enhancing of the look of that fence aesthetically.
Now, who maintains all the weeds along the fence? Is that Mr. Costanza as well?
It is. Probably after tonight, it will be our responsibility.
I mean, Tom, is this something that if it's dilapidated, maybe that's code enforcement issue, right?
Yeah, it is a code enforcement issue as well. The other issue with that fence is that it's a chain link fence and there are, trees growing up through it. So while a coat of paint may address it temporarily, I think ultimately it'll probably have to get removed and replaced.
Does he want to sell?
Typically when there's an increase in the intensity of use, that's when you address certain non-conforming aspects of a property. So that's why we're recommending that it be done in conjunction with this conditional use permit.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Freeman.
So as I understand it, we can impose a condition that they replace the fence within 12 months or 24 months. So we can do that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Are you asking Mr. Wicklund?
Yes.
Yes, you can do
Okay.
that.
So because I understand the restaurant owner is strapped during this difficult time, so I certainly don't want them to economically have to pay for a fence this moment, though I would like to see a better fence there. But clearly, I would be in favor of putting a 12-month limitation, giving them a year to get it all worked out, and then have an appropriate fence be constructed there. That would be my input.
Okay. Any other discussion regarding Mr.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Buxa.
just so I'm clear, the fence is not on petitioner's property.
Mr. Vanderwood, that's
Petitioners-
correct.
Petitioners do not own the fence. I'm just very uneasy about requiring them to replace or repair something that's not theirs.
Well, do we know, is the fence on the property line or is it clearly on the side that belongs to Mr. Costanza?
That parking lot is owned by Mr. Costanza, and yes, it's on his property.
Okay.
Then Tom, shouldn't the town be sending Mr. Costanza a letter saying it's time to replace that fence?
We could do that. I will point out that they have a shared parking agreement with Mr. Costanza. And
They don't own the property.
that's true. That is true. However, I think it's not beyond their abilities to replace that fence.
Well, is this something we should be talking to Mr. Costanza at the next meeting?
You could.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, Mr. Wicklund, can we legally require a non-property owner to construct or pay for a fence on property that is not his? That's the question.
Yeah, the answer is, in my opinion, no. I think it's a horse of a different color now that we know that the fence is owned by Mr. Costanza. However, it seems to me that the parties, given the fact that there's a joint parking agreement, get together and repair the fence within a period of time. But you may want to talk to Mr. Costanza about that at the Plan Commission level as well.
Gentlemen, if I may speak for a moment. we're in agreement. It's not a beautiful fence. It certainly could be enhanced, and it certainly would enhance Mr. Costanza's property as well as our use of his property. So we're not negating that issue. There are obviously issues with building something, erecting something on someone else's property. So in the spirit of trying to work this out and enhance the aesthetics, we'll speak with Mr. Costanza, and we can certainly try and move forward and do something. We are merely saying at this time, financially, that's offensive. It's got to be at least 80 feet long. If we were to replace it, we would want it to look significantly better than the fence that the town has adjacent to our property. We would want it to look much better than that. So we could be talking about in excess of $5,000 easily in terms of putting up a nice looking fence there. We're not against that. Merely at this time, with the current COVID situation and the lack of our business, financially, it would be it would strap us to have to do that right now. We're not against painting the fence if Mr. Costanza will allow us to do that to make it look better right now. It is not falling over. The fence is actually in good repair with the exception of the plastic slats that are in it right now. We could certainly enhance it, and we wouldn't be against possibly a 24-month period of time to try and replace that fence. If we could work that out with Mr. Costanza, take care of the hold harmlesses. Obviously, a survey would probably be required by the town. There would have to be insurance, bids would have to be collected on it. But we're not against that. We would like to improve the property. Just understand, all we're trying to do is put tables outside on our property right now. And in trying to do so, we're being asked to replace someone else's fence. That's
Mr.
it.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Buxa.
I make a motion that we forward to the town council a favorable recommendation to approve BZA docket 20-004 with the following condition, singular. 1, 313 Ridge Kaplan will fully implement their approved landscaping plan prior to opening the patio, period, end of resolution.
We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion?
Would Mr. Buxa would be willing to amend that motion to indicate that that the second condition would be that the property owners of the restaurant, the petitioner here, would try to work out a satisfactory agreement with the Mr. Costanza, the adjoining owner, to do something about the fence within a 24-month period of time?
I think the town's remedy, as stated earlier by someone else, was that the town should approach the property owner, in this case, Mr. Costanza. And then if Mr. Costanza needs help from petitioners, that it's something he needs to work out with them on a private basis.
So I gather you're not willing to amend the motion.
I am not.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Tom, would you please call roll?
Sharon Mayer,
Yes.
Stuart Friedman,
Yes.
Dan Buxa,
Yes.
Jonathan Peterson,
Yes.
Roland Raffin.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, really appreciate your time, guys.
Thank you.
The next item is item 8, findings of facts, BZA 20-001. What's the position of the board? Have you had a chance to review that findings of facts? And is it an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, are we taking them up separately?
Yeah, I'll take them separately since we're not in person. So I'll do each
Okay.
one separate.
I believe that the Michael Dust findings of fact is correct as presented, so I motion to approve.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I second that, Mr. Chairman.
Tom, since we're on Zoom, would you call roll?
Sharon Mayer,
Yes.
Stuart Freeman,
Yes.
Daniel Buxa,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
Jonathan Peterson,
Yes.
motion carries.
Carries. The next one is findings of facts, BZA 20-002 CFNI. They're up on the screen. What is the position of the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I believe the findings accurately reflect our action, and therefore I make a motion to approve the findings as presented.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I will second that, Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion? Tom, would you please call roll?
Sharon Mayer,
Yes.
Stuart Freeman,
Yes.
Daniel Buxa,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
Jonathan Peterson,
Yes.
motion carries.
There's no other additional items for discussion or other business. Our next regular meeting is June 9, 2020. We'll find out if it's on Zoom in the next few weeks. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So
So
moved.
moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? See you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
Chairman.
Call this meeting of the Munster Planning Commission for Tuesday, May 12th, 2020 to order. Please set everything to stun and let's do the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, and justice for all. Outstanding. All right, next up, Mr. Vanderwood, roll call, please.
Councilor Kulturitis,
Present.
Councilor Gardner,
Present.
Councilor Tulowitzki,
Present.
Stuart Freeman,
Present.
Roland Raffin,
Present.
Brian Specht,
Present.
Herman Baker,
Here. All right, we got a quorum. Let's go. Approval of the minutes from April 14th, 2020. Is there any motions, corrections, modifications? What say you?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. Any comments? Mr. Vanderwood?
Councilor Kulturitis,
Yes.
Councilor Gardner,
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
Stuart Freeman,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
Brian Specht,
Yes.
Chairman Baker.
Yes. All right, they're out there for all to see. Next preliminary hearing, PC 20-005, Town of Munster Plan Commission seeking to amend certain sections of the Munster zoning ordinance related to fences in side yards. Boy, Mr. Vanderwood.
Okay, so this is coming from the staff. As you all know, we recently adopted an updated zoning ordinance. Previous version of that code expressly permitted fences in rear yards with a maximum height of 6 feet and fences in front yards with a maximum height of 42 inches and an aggregate length of 16 feet. It was silent on the subject of fences in side yards. In other words, it didn't say anything about the height of a fence in a side yard, whether or not it was permitted or not. Over the years that code was in place, different people in the building department interpreted it differently. So you can drive around town and see that there are some neighborhoods where there are a lot of fences that are 6 feet tall in side yards, and then there are neighborhoods where there aren't. So when we updated our zoning code, we kind of defaulted to a stricter interpretation. And what we did was we restricted the height of fences in side yards to 42 inches, which is the front yard standard, rather than 6 feet, which is the rear yard standard. Since then, actually this spring,
We've reviewed a number of applications for 6-foot high side yard fences. And a number of residents have asked us about it and sought to get approval to build those fences. We had no choice but to deny those applications. But in response to that, did a survey of the town.
Hey, Tom, you're all garbled up, man.
He's on a CB radio.
Breaker 19.
Having technical difficulties, I'll try to speak more slowly, maybe. That help?
I don't know if is that possible?
Very funny, very funny.
It sounds like you're.
You talked much slower. We were going to start till at 9:30 instead of 8:30.
So in any case, so we sort of did a little bit of research into the types of fences that are in the neighborhoods and determined that, you know, there are many, essentially throughout town, we've got situations where there are 6-foot side yard fences. And so rather than dictate a standard that is not in keeping with the character of the community, we thought, let's just go ahead and initiate a zoning amendment to allow these, because it appears that they're desired. So the amendment that we're presenting tonight is to essentially just modify the zoning to permit side yard fences to be 6 feet in height.
Okay. Fencing. So any comments from the board on this issue as we're making a decision to move this to a public hearing?
Mr. Chairman, I see it all over town, and I would set
Fencing?
no fencing up to the front and the side yards. Looks like it was allowed before. It's probably an oversight regarding the new ordinance. You know, I drove down Ridge Road, saw a handful of them, saw them in other spots. Didn't deter from the look of the property or the adjacent properties, in my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else?
I concur with that assessment.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to set this for a public hearing.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Yeah, second from Tulowitzki.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, since we're remote, Mr. Vanderwood, it's all roll call for you.
Councilor Kulturitis,
Yes.
Councilor Gardner,
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
Stuart Freeman,
Yes.
Nolan Raffin,
Yes.
Grant Specht,
Yes.
Chairman Baker.
Yes. Wrong on the fences. Everybody, when they're driving around between now and the next meeting, please pay attention to what's going on with this stuff, please. Thank you. Next up, PC 20-006, Town of Munster Plan Commission. Seeking to amend certain sections of the Munster zoning ordinance related to gasoline station signs. Mr. Vanderwood, we've talked about this before.
Yeah, so this is another instance where we think it was essentially a reference that was mistaken in the new zoning code. It deals with a question of whether or not a gas station can have an electronic price board. That's the monument sign that says what the price of the gasoline is. We have a section in the code that actually forbids that. It says that changeable copy is only permitted on a gasoline pump. We think that was meant to say actually a monument sign, because that's where you find the changeable copy. So we're introducing this text amendment to the zoning code just to rectify that, as well as to clarify that we are permitting electronic gas station price signs. Again, it's a situation where it came to our attention when somebody applied to change their sign. We looked in the code, we realized that it wasn't permitted. We went around and reviewed all of the 12 gas stations in
in Munster determined that 10 out of the 12 already have these electronic signs. And so unless we wanted to make a dramatic change and have those electronic signs be converted back into just regular manually changed signs, we figured it'd be better just to allow the other two to conform the meeting 10.
Tom, this is Bill. Didn't we go over this significantly when we were redoing the sign ordinance as it related to gas stations?
Since I've been here, we did make one change to the gas station sign standards, and that was related to whether or not signs could be permitted on pumps, because at the time that I came into this position, they were not permitted. So what we did was we modified the zoning to allow them to brand pumps off so that they weren't permitted any additional square footage beyond what any other commercial business would be allowed. They would have to subtract that square footage from their monument sign area. So the total sign site or the site sign area would be the same. They could just choose whether or not to put it on pumps or on a monument.
Thank you. Okay, back to the board. Any questions, comments on this? For some reason, I'm thinking we've had more than one swing at this one.
Mr. Chairman, this is just making LED signs for changing copy on the monument signs for gas prices. That being said, I'll make a motion to set it for public hearing.
I will
second it.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Let me say one thing. Does it say specifically for fueling stations? I mean, could anybody else slip under this thing, Tom?
It says
The amendment says gasoline station monument sign.
and it's it's not branding, obviously changeable copy advertisement. It's directly related to the price of the pump.
Okay, so let's pretend we live in Munster and you have a gas station that has a White Castle attached to it. So how are we going to be able to make a determination between the two?
Well, it doesn't.
Well,
you can't
we're
say.
somewhat restricted in our ability to actually say what they can put on it as far as, I don't know if we can say that they can advertise the price of gas, but not the price of a fountain drink on that. But I will double check between now and the public hearing if there's a way that I can just tighten that up and make sure that that's limited to displaying the price of gas.
Yeah,
I'll have to look
price
into
per gallon or something like that. Okay.
Chairman
Any other
Baker?
Any other comments?
Yeah, Chairman Baker, you said that we had a couple swings at this before. What was the discussion before? What was the intent, or what direction would we like to have this go?
No, Councilman, we talked about signage significantly, I don't know how many years ago, having to do with redoing the whole signage ordinance. And I was trying, we had more than one discussion specifically about gas stations and trying to accommodate them, yet not open the door for other LED signs that would have a rotation or a copy that's able to be changed on a short-term basis, let's put it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I personally think that the non-LED ones look a little better, but this is 2020. It's kind of silly if you can't have a digital sign be updated for the price of fuel. So I have no issue with the proposed change.
Is there any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. Mr. Vanderwood.
Councilor Kulturitis,
Yes.
Councilor Gardner,
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
Stuart Friedman,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
Brian Specht,
Yes.
Chairman Baker.
Yes. Okay, moving right along. Next up is the public hearing, PC 19-012, Guy Costanza, GM contractor, requesting preliminary plat approval of a one-lot commercial subdivision to construct a 2,800 square foot building and parking lot for use as a cafe at 407-411 Ridge Road. Somebody to speak on this, or would you like to go first, Mr. Vanderwood?
I can speak on it briefly. This is a plan that we've seen a few times now. The Guy Costanza, GM Contracting, is proposing to consolidate the parcels at 407, 411 Ridge Road, construct a cafe or some other commercial building. There have been a few iterations of the plans that we've seen, and I'll just say that the most recent version has moved the building a little bit closer to Ridge Road for a shallower setback. They've kind of revised the retention pond in the northwest corner of the property. They've reduced the building size. They've added a right in, right out to the driveway or the curb cut. And they've added some additional green space. They still fell short of the standards for setbacks and for parking. But earlier this evening, they received approval of a variance for that parking and for the setbacks. So at this point, they do comply with the zoning. There was a condition, though, placed on this approval of the variances, which said that the building must comply with our current zoning standards. So the layout of the site was essentially approved by the BZA. And now it's coming to the Plan Commission for subdivision approval and ultimately, but not tonight, the approval of a development plan.
Okay, thank you. Is there somebody to speak on behalf of the petitioner?
This is Don Toringa. I would assume that Mr. Costanza would want to speak, but I don't see him on the online. In regards to the project, pretty much everything has been said in the past. Exactly what Mr. Vanderwood said. We did make some changes to the plans, trying to meet the requirements that were put forth by the Plan Commission. The actual reason for the subdivision is because it was 2 parcels of land with 2 houses. And by code, by ordinance, we need to subdivide this into 1 lot. So with that being said, if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
I'll start, Mr. Taringa. Thank you very much. Is it safe to assume that the use has been selected for this site, i.e. a restaurant/cafe?
Yes. It's safe to say that that's what he wants to put there. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm going to recommend, after sitting through the lengthy BZA process, that we kind of continue and table this for the fact that we put some conditions on there and the design of the building, the foundation layout's the same, the site plan's the same, but the means and methods of constructing the building aren't reflective in the drawings that are presented tonight. We put stipulations on that we wanted the building to have a 2-story in appearance building to kind of match the future CD4 requirements that will be built on Ridge Road. These plans don't reflect that. And I'd also like to see the new design presented before we approve any kind of developmental standard, as well as the actual building materials.
Thank you. Is that safe to assume, Mr. Raffin, that that was a motion?
That was a conditional approval of the site plan of the BZA. That was part of the approval process of the Board of Zoning Appeals for the site plan.
Understood. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this? on the board?
The only I'm sorry. The only item I would like to mention is that I do believe it's been listed a couple times in the documents on the agenda and on the report that the building is a 2,800 square foot building. I believe it's been reduced to 2,500 square feet.
And that was the same size building, 2,500, that was approved by the BZA.
Right.
Roland, did you make a motion to table it?
I made a motion to continue it. Mr. Reed and Mr. Costanza aren't here, and I know they have to rework on doing some drawings regarding this as well.
So there was a motion.
Yes, he was.
Yes, there was a motion.
Okay, well, that was the question. All right, there's a motion. Is there a second to that emotion? Not a motion. Is there a second to the motion by Mr. Raffin?
I'll second it.
Okay.
All right, so there's a motion and a second, so we can now have discussion as it relates to what's going on with this. Mr. Do you have something to say outside of what we just went through?
Do I?
Mr. Speck?
No.
All right. Anybody else on the board? All right, we got a motion and a second to table that. Is that correct, Mr. Raffin?
Yes, it is.
May I?
All right, Mr. Vanderwood, if there's no other discussion, let's go.
Chairman Baker, may I make one comment?
Yes, you may.
For the for Mr. Costanza, there was a letter by Mr. Gepfert about bicycle use. There's some green space in the front here in that little triangle property in front of the sidewalk. I'd recommend that he work in some bike racks in that, just to encourage bicycle use in a future design.
That's a great proposal.
That was it.
Can I say something, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
I don't think we're asking for site plan approval according to what's on this agenda. I think we're asking for a preliminary plat approval. Am I wrong in that assumption, Tom? Preliminary plat to me would mean the two lots into one. And there's plenty of time to come back with the site plan and make the changes that Mr. Raffin suggested.
Yeah.
And Mr. Bringa,
I think there may be a concern, though, that the plans may have to be modified slightly, and that may affect the plan set that was presented today. I'll also point out that I've had some conversations with our engineer, Jill DiTomaso, and she has indicated that she still has a couple of questions about how the stormwater is going to work. Particularly how the rain garden and the parking lot storage works. So, Don, I think there may be a few changes to the plans that still need to be made.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else?
No, I call for the vote on the motion.
Mr. Freeman's ready to go. So am I. Mr. Vanderwood?
Councilor Kulturitis?
Yes.
Councilor Gardner?
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki?
Yes.
Stuart Friedman?
Yes.
Roland Raffin?
Yes.
Brian Specht?
Yes.
Chairman Baker?
Yes. All right, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Let's keep rolling. All right, I'm doing these individually. Next up is PC 20-002. Maple Leaf Crossing LLC, Jay Leeser requesting preliminary plat approval to consolidate two lots into a one-lot commercial subdivision at 9450 Calumet Avenue. Mr. Vanderwood, this one came in at the last minute, huh?
Yeah, the plans that you have attached to the agenda and to the staff report, we received on Monday morning, so yesterday morning at about 8 o'clock. Just to back up though, just to describe, because I know that at least one plan commission member had asked me about the process for this project and what types of approvals are actually needed. So I'll just remind everyone that this is, there's kind of two things happening. One is approval of a preliminary plat to consolidate the Munster Business Complex lot with a piece of property to the west, a 1 acre piece of property that was in the process of being transferred from the town to the property owner. Or to the applicant, I should say.
And then there's also an amendment to our plan, to the plan unit development. So those are the primary two actions that have been requested at this point. In order for those things to happen, you kind of need to approve the preliminary plat, which is the map that shows the lots and the easements and that sort of thing. And then the PUD amendment, which has two components, one of which is a site plan, which you kind of gave an endorsement to 2 months ago. And then the other part of that is an ordinance, which is kind of like the unique zoning ordinance that's been written in this area. Those are the three things that we need to review and to approve. Once that is approved, there can be actual infrastructure installed and a final plat approval received. And then when individual buildings are built, each one will come before the Plan Commission for a development plan.
So you went sideways again, Tom. So, all right. So what you're suggesting, and correct me if I'm not repeating it correctly, is that you still see a discussion here as it relates to the preliminary plat approval and combining the two lots into one. So, Mr. Wicklund, are you of the opinion that we should be doing these simultaneously or as individual items? You're muted, Dave. Dave, you're muted. Bottom left where the microphone is. There you go.
You're
there
on.
you go. You got it. Talk now.
Okay. I think probably you should do them separately. That's my my thinking. Preliminary plat on the one hand, the PUD amendment on the other. And I don't know if the engineering that you have now is sufficient to satisfy preliminary plat approval.
Is that what you're trying to say, Tom? Is that you don't have the information that you need as it relates to staff approvals or staff recommendations to be able to grant this preliminary plat approval?
That's not what I was saying. I was just describing the process. But to answer your question, yeah, we may or may not have plans here that are satisfactory from an engineering standpoint. Given the short sort of turnaround expectation for the review, we just were not able to complete that review in a substantive way. I think the staff has given a very cursory review of it, and we think that, you know, it appears to be, you know, a logical extension of the site plan that was approved a couple months ago, but in terms of the actual detailed review, we just haven't done it. We haven't had time. Our engineer, Jill, who's on the line tonight, she can answer some questions, but you know, her schedule just didn't permit her to kind of do the review yesterday or today.
No, and I understand that. I guess my question is that we're basically taking two parcels and combining it into one as a preliminary plat for a subdivision, right? So is the engineering isn't really integral to making that decision. Am I correct?
Whenever we do a subdivision, we do require that engineering plans be provided.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Help me.
Okay, so you're looking at a site plan engineering wise, and obviously the site has to meet state and local codes, right? Now,
yeah, but you're taking two lots and make them into one, right?
Yes, exactly. Which you're going to have to make two lots into one to make the thing continue to go as a development, right? But if holding the engineering back another month I don't think it's the right thing to do. But I think that this can be contingent. I don't know, Mr. Wicklund, that this could be contingent on obviously staff, Jill working with Mr. Tranga to make sure everything meets code, which I would guess this is going to meet code when she reviews these drawings, maybe with a few little changes.
It would
That
not,
way,
it
that
would
way
not-
would be fine.
it would not be unprecedented for the Plan Commission to approve contingent upon staff review and approval of the engineered plans.
That's correct.
I hate to see this get dragged for another month on engineering wise when this is all site. I mean, Mr. Leeser's gonna have to come back for developmental standard review once the buildings are designed and all that kind of stuff. We're trying to get the shovels in the ground to get the infrastructure in where the roads are gonna be plotted so we can get the development going. And it's May and we're gonna be going into June if it's another month.
Roland, though, this specific one, though, has to do with the preliminary plan, combining 2 lots into 1. We can beat the hell out of the actual layout of the place in the next amendment. To
Right,
the
right.
correct?
Yes, let's focus on this one first. And
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, let's focus on this as being an issue. Is there anything that would prevent us from taking 2 pieces of property, combining them into 1, just on the standalone of what we have right here as a commercial piece of property? Be there none, then that's the first one. I mean, we can go after it on the next aspect of
Mr.
it.
Chairman, are you looking for a motion?
You bet.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve this preliminary plat.
I second it. There's a motion and a
And I'll
second.
second that.
All right, motion and a second. Any discussion?
Was that
And we're-
motion? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Steve. I'm just asking and clarifying that this motion is contingent upon approval from the site, from the engineering, staff review of the engineering. Is that
Well, I
correct?
think we're moving into that in the next one, right? Mr. Baker?
Well, I mean,
and I'll make it contingent because it's gonna have to pass state and local codes anyways. So
Yeah.
if you want to put it as a contingent, yes, I'll amend that motion.
Right.
Sure.
Agreed.
It needs state and local codes and it has staff review.
Right.
Okay.
Seconded.
And that
Anything
was-
else?
That was my clarification too. Just a couple comments from the council that this acre has been awarded for this express purpose. And also there's been a 180-day extension on the contract, the terms of the development agreement. So we do definitely want to get started on this right away. So I would be in favor of this motion.
Okay, so we still have a motion. We have a motion now and a second. Tom, do you have that written down as far as what the motion is?
I have a motion to approve the
I
preliminary
didn't,
contingent upon staff review of and approval of the engineering plans.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, is there any other discussion on that motion? Be there none. Mr. Vanderwood, there's a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilor Kulturitis,
Yes.
Councilor Gardner,
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
Stuart Friedman,
yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
Brian Speck,
Yes.
Chairman Baker.
Yes. All right, moving right along. The next one up is PC 20-003 Maple Leaf Crossings LLC. Jay Leeser requesting amendments to the Munster Business Complex Plan Unit Development at 9450 Calumet Avenue. Mr. Vanderwood.
I don't have any report on this petition. I don't have any PUD amendment materials to present.
All right, so there's no staff recommendations because of a timing thing. Is that safe to assume?
Well, as I was describing at the outset of the presentation, there's 2 pieces to the planned unit development. One is kind of that site plan, and the other is the ordinance. So since we don't have that material, you kind of endorsed the site plan, but we don't have an ordinance amendment to approve tonight. So I don't have a recommendation to approve or deny. I guess I would say that we would just continue that until we receive those amendments.
Okay, Mr. Leeser, do you have any presentation? Is there anything that you'd like to say on behalf of this project?
It's coming along nicely, and we need to continue the PUD amendments till next month.
Okay,
We need to get this drawing for,
Mr. Chairman, I make a move. Yeah, go ahead.
we needed to get this engineered drawings and the site plan in front of you so we can move forward with the staff to approve what Turinga has engineered. And if you can continue our PUD amendment to June 9th, we'll also have a parking and traffic study for you then too.
thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I'll second Mr. Freeman's motion to continue.
So there's a motion to continue and a second. Is that safe to say, Mr. Friedman?
Yes.
Any discussion with regards to that? Either none, Mr. Vanderwood.
Counselor Kulturitis,
Yes.
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
Stuart Friedman,
Yes.
Roland Raffin,
Yes.
Brian Specht,
Yes.
Chairman Baker.
Yes, sir. All right, moving right along. No developmental plan review, no findings of facts. Is there any other business or additional items for discussion? Going once, going twice. That's it. Next regular scheduled meeting is June 9th, 2020. Hopefully, we're going to be in the same room. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks. I appreciate your help in making Munster a better place to live.
Right on.
Good
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
night.
Mr. Baker. Back.